Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your host, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hey, Rainey. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm waking up.
Yeah.
My little cup of coffee here.
Get a little stretch and a bend.
Right. We don't normally record at this hour.
Yeah. It's weird to be drinking coffee and not LaCroix.
Yeah. To know Jason Bennett is to know I am not a morning person.
Also me.
Takes me a good hour and a half to wake up in the morning.
Yep. But sometimes our guests live in different time zones and we have to accommodate their schedule. So here we are recording early in the morning.
Yeah. Early for us in the morning.
Regular time for other people.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And that's a good segue. We're heading on over to Indiana today to talk to our interviewee about opposition research, episode 15, The Peculiar World of Opposition Research.
I can't wait to find out what is involved in opposition research.
Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of myths or, a bit of a mystique around what opposition research is. And most people probably perceive it to be sort of dark underbelly of campaigns. But today we'll be talking with Jake Wagman, a principal at Shield Political Research, his opposition research firm that provides work for Democratic campaigns, progressive nonprofits, and certain corporate clients about what opposition research is, how you can do it if you can't afford to hire a firm, and the best things to watch out for when you're hiring staff. So I'm excited to talk to him today about his views on opposition research.
And you know how much I love talking to former reporters.
Yes.
Being one myself. So
yes.
Joining the ranks of people who jump from reporting and going into politics. Jake worked for a newspaper in the Philadelphia area and then in St. Louis, and he was a reporter for 11 years. And he says, when not helping Democrats and progressive organizations hold their opposition accountable, Jake enjoys watching the St. Louis Cardinals take on their opposition and spending time with his wife and kids.
Yes.
Yay, Jake.
Nice work, Jake. Baseball fan, right? The Cardinals are baseball?
Yes.
I don't know
sports.
anything. I don't know
Jason,
anything about sports. All right, back to politics and campaigns and elections. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Jake, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be here.
We talked about your bio very briefly and the work that Shield Research does, but I'm wondering if you can spend just a few minutes talking to us about the work that you used to do as a reporter and what led you to move into campaign work.
Yeah, it was a very logical transition, and I'm proof that you could have a second career as a political consultant. I was a reporter for about half my life, for 15 years, counting the time in college. But as you might, and I worked in Philadelphia, in South Jersey, for about 2 years after college. I went to the University of Missouri for journalism school. And I worked in Philadelphia, South Jersey, Camden area for 2 years. And then I went to St. Louis, where my final beat was I was the newspaper's top political reporter, which covering local, state, and when it came to us, national politics, like if the president came to town, that type of thing, state Senate, U.S. Senate races, and so forth. But as you may know, journalism is not a growth industry. And it was cool when I was 22 or 25 and I didn't have a family and I didn't care about how much money I made and I could just burn the midnight oil and all I cared about was kicking ass and getting bylines. As I got older, my family life changed. My wife, who's much smarter than me, was getting her PhD, and she was going to be studying to be a professor, which she is now. Which I know if there's anybody listening who's a professor who has a family member for a professor is a professor, you have to go to the job. There's not that many. So I knew at some point that I'd have to move. I'd have to quit reporting and move if my wife was going to be a professor. And so I came to peace with that, and I was covering a campaign and in City Hall, And I live and breathe campaign finance reports. I mean, it's like if you're a chef and you go into another restaurant, you look at your menu and you decode it. Like when I see campaign finance reports, I'm like Neo in the Matrix, just like I just see right through it.
That is super nerdy.
Weirdo alert. Weirdo alert.
So, I mean, I love it. And what's funny is, as an aside, I like the expenditures more than the contributions, because the contributions are okay, there's interesting, but you can really get a feel for what's going on in a campaign. When I was a reporter, I would look a lot at the expenditures. And I did a story on somebody who, a former state senator in Missouri, and forgive the aside, it's worth it, a former state senator in Missouri who went on a shopping spree at the mall with her campaign funds. And she had retro, and she bought like clothes and shoes and all this stuff and video games, I guess for her kids or for grandkids or somebody. And she had to sort of retroactively make it acceptable. So she's putting on all these things like campaign dress, and it's like some gown store at the mall. And the best was she put campaign watch batteries. What? That was her. Oh, and what's brilliant about it is most of the time folks get away with that because the various ethics commissions give wide latitude to folks to use their campaign funds as they see fit. But she got busted, and they gave her like a $250,000 fine. It went all the way to this state Supreme Court. It went on long after I left the paper. It was awesome.
Wow.
But in any case, so I was looking at these, and thank you for allowing the digression. And so I was looking at campaign finance reports, and in the back of my mind, I was saying, Jake, you're going to have to get a new career when your wife becomes a professor. And it was already very difficult in the family because I had a young child at home, and the hours, and it's one thing to work more and get paid more, but they don't do overtime in journalism.
Right.
And then I see something on a campaign finance report, opposition research. And it was actually a guy, the consultant was a guy, Will Caskey in Chicago, who's very well known.
I know Will. Yeah.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, and he's one of the, he and a couple of other folks are generally considered, I think, the pioneers, at least in the Democratic side of this. But anyway, I had never heard of this before. And this must have been 2009, maybe, around then, maybe 2010. And I think I contacted Caskey, not as a consultant, but as a reporter, because like I said, the expenditures give you an idea. It was actually the person who was spending the opposition research, it gives you an idea. Well, they're worried about somebody. So I don't remember if I quoted Caskey in the story or not, but a seed was planted when I learned about what it was. I would do a lot of investigative reporting on candidates. It was almost the same thing, except if instead of getting paid a salary by the newspaper, I would get paid by the campaigns. And I was free from the handcuffs of quote-unquote objectivity that we had to adhere to at the newspaper. And I love journalists, and I love journalism, and I love newspapers. I read like 6 or 7 a day. But, the problem is there's certain barriers to objectivity. For one, let's say you got like a source that's giving you all this information, and then you find out some bad things about the source. You're in a situation where you have to burden your source and not get any of the good stuff, or not write about somebody because they're giving you information, which is an ethical gray zone. And so with opposition research, I don't have to worry about that stuff. There's no veneer of objectivity. I am hired by this campaign to find out information on this other person, and increasingly our own campaigns, our own clients. I could get to that a bit later.
So before we go any further, let's stop and take a moment to define what is opposition research.
Opposition research is finding the vulnerabilities on your opponent that can be exploited in many different ways. information to a reporter. Okay, paid media, you use it in a mail or TV. Those are the obvious ones. There's other layers. A lot of times you guys are familiar with the shadow primary. Okay,
no, I'm not familiar with the shadow primary. I don't know what that means.
Oh, you're not. Oh, well, meaning that. So part of the reason these primaries start so early, these races, that there's all these machinations going on behind the scenes, months and months before any ballots are cast. And so people say, well, why do they start their campaign so early? It's because there's these little mini skirmishes before you get to the ballot. For instance, so a lot of times what happens is somebody will say to me, they'll say, Jake, labor endorsements coming up. Can you find some bad labor stuff on my opponent? That's an example of something that's not necessarily, that's not going to get you the earned media or the paid media or the TV, but that helps you along the way. So research isn't just, it's not just straight from my computer to the mail or the TV firm. Secondly, a lot of times you're talking about, you're competing for the same donors. And I work a lot of primaries because that's the nature of districts today. That's where the fight usually is. So you're competing for the same donors. If you could go to a donor and say, listen, this person is their license got suspended after a DWI, they declared bankruptcy, their candidacy is they're just not going to do well. You don't want to give your money to this person. That's the shadow primary. That's the struggle that goes on before you even have mailers or TV or anything like that. And so more obvious things like polling. A lot of times we work directly with the polling firm because the polling firm knows how to ask the questions, but they need information to frame the question. So if they're going to test your opponent's negatives, which is to say which ones resonate the most, well, the pollsters are great at asking the questions, but they need the information first. So a lot of times before you hire a pollster says, well, do you have research? And it's funny how in campaigns, sometimes research means me, and sometimes research means polling, and you're just supposed to kind of figure out which one the person's talking about.
Right.
So in that sense, it's not just find something and use it in mail or TV or slip it to a reporter. It's a bit more of a zagging road, and in that sense, it's a multiple-edged device. You can use it in different ways. And finally, and what we do a lot of increasingly is self-research, which is something I didn't know about 6 years ago when I started. Hey, what's the opponent going to find out about me?
Right.
And that's important because if something's going on, you want to find out about it right away, maybe when you're in a position of doing something about it, and not in October. And a lot of times, the people who are the party committees that are in a position of endorsing or providing support are going to want that candidate to have self-research. They don't want to throw dollars and elbow grease and volunteer power at somebody who is not going to make the cut because we find out 3 weeks before the election they were arrested for domestic assault.
So do you think we have a lot of, candidates who are listening who are in down ballot races with small budgets, and let's say they have the money to hire a researcher for their opposition or for themselves. Do you think it's more important to know that information about your opponent or to find your own blind spots to know what you're going to get attacked on?
That's a tough question because whenever somebody asks me about self-research, there's usually something out there that they want to know if somebody can find.
Right.
And it happens. It happens. I'll be working on a project. I'll be humming along, checking the boxes, and then I see it: an arrest report, a bankruptcy, a tax lien, some type of investigation, and I say, well, here I made it. This is it. This is the thing they wanted me to find. I can't answer that. Both are so important. The only caveat is if you're not in a head-to-head race, if you're against, if it's an open seat and 4 or 5 people are competing, unless you have somebody you could clearly identify as your top rival, maybe the self-research is better because you're not going to attack everybody.
That's a good point.
But, I try. When I got into this, one of the things I said to myself was, I'm going to make my prices better to get down ballot races. Because what I was seeing was that a lot of these firms charge $10,000 a book. And if you've got a state rep race, let's say you got a state rep race with a $50,000, $60,000 budget, which is good, good. They're not going to use 20% of that on research.
Right.
But let's say you could make them $2,500 and they had a $60,000 budget. Okay. Yeah, let's do that. And it's beneficial to me because smaller races aren't necessarily as much work, so I can afford to take take a lower fee. And I build equity. Somebody running for state rep today is running for state senate tomorrow, then Congress, and then on and on. And what I've learned about political consulting is that, yes, you have to be hooked in with the right people to get the work, but it changes. There's all that everybody is. There's a new crop of consultants and candidates coming up every year, and so you rise with them. I mean, you don't have to be on David Axelrod's contact list to get work. And it's just a lot of those Obama folks in the consultant world gave way to the Hillary folks, and we'll see what happens. Actually, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but you don't have to. You don't have to be born doing it.
Right.
It takes some gumption to make those inroads, but you're not locked out forever if you didn't start it. You just got to make the right connections, and those people, you guys will all go up together.
Right. I want to talk about 2 pieces here. One, the mechanics of what this kind of research entails, right? What do you have to do to get opposition research? Let's say, even with your great package deals that you pull together for folks, these down ballot campaigns just can't come up with the resources to pay for this. What they can do to get decent opposition research and self-research done on their own. And then without, giving away the farm, you don't want to give away your trade secrets there, Jake. And then right. The second part of it is, as we've moved along, the 2016 election cycle in particular, how do you determine what is good, a good piece of information on your opposition that's usable? Because if you really sort of take a step back, the 2016 election cycle, well, affairs don't seem to matter to people. Bankruptcies don't seem to matter to people. A couple of the items that you had talked about, there's a number of things that Donald Trump's campaign was accused of and did, and people just didn't seem to care very much. Has that changed, or is that an exception to the rule?
I think, it's tough because people say that same thing to me. And I sort of have existential moments where I say, well, they got everything in the world in this guy, and it didn't matter. What am I doing here? The truth is, though, is that Donald Trump is the exception and not the rule.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God.
And I, at the risk of offending some Republicans, Democrats are more discerning. And because I do a lot of primaries, and that's my audience, those voters, then that would never, those type of things would offend them, or maybe maybe some Republican voters, obviously, are more forgivable. And so, but when you're doing smaller races, these things do matter. If you have somebody running for mayor and they got a DWI That's a big hit because DWIs are relatively common. I mean, you're more likely to find a candidate that had a DWI than robbed a bank, for instance. But man, you don't know the type of documents that come with a DWI. Okay, like when you get arrested for a DWI, you have to say like all the medication you're taking. You have to. There's all this public information: what you were drinking, where you were, did you steal your word? Like it's embarrassing. Okay, it's forgivable, and people make mistakes, and I get that. But from sitting in my seat, those are like gold. And so I shouldn't revel in anybody's misery, but so forgive me. But on a smaller scale and smaller races, those things matter, especially since, what if there's not a lot of separation between the candidates? What if on paper they seem similar? What if you've got a 2 or 3 way primary for a state senator race? How are you going to separate? Okay, so if given the choice between supporting the candidate who had a $20,000 IRS tax lien and one who didn't, that might make the difference. Now, in this other question, so let's say somebody doesn't want to hire a research firm; they want to see what they could do on their own because they're on a shoestring budget. Many state court systems have an online, or you're able to find them online. Put your name in, put your opponent's name in. See what comes back. You probably get a couple parking. You probably get everybody's got a speeding ticket. Look at the speeding tickets. Did the person not show up and they got a warrant for their arrest? Okay. Did they not pay and they get a suspended driver's license? Or is there something else there? So that's something you could do if you go to your state court website. You could do that in 10 minutes. So you could do that like you get your first cup of coffee in the morning. A little bit more advanced. Here's a trick that I do that I do it. I've done it hundreds of times now. So most people have never been arrested, right? They've never been had cuffs placed on them and thrown in jail for doing something. However, many people, many more people have had some interaction with the cops, with police. Now, you don't realize that any time there's an interaction with a police officer, however low grade, it's memorialized in a report. So what I do is, I'll say, if I'm doing research on somebody, I'll write to the local police department, and I'll say, hi, can you send me any report you have on this individual, and you have to give his birth date, his or her birth date, and that's all they need. That, again, if you could just find the email for the records or email the chief even, if it's not a big place, that takes 15 minutes. Even if you know your date, your month, the age of the opponent. And it takes 10 minutes. What could you get out of it? Well, let's say the person had a fight with their spouse and somebody hit somebody. Well, that's the end of in many races I work, that's the end of the game. That's it. Candidate's done. Okay, so opposition research is what has been referred to as a force multiplier. One person, one element, which can have an outsized effect relative to their place on the campaign. It's like a sniper in the army, okay? If all the armies can fight, if that one sniper can take out a general, then the war is over. So that's the definition of a force multiplier. That's what opposition research is. It has the ability to, if you have the right target, if you get lucky, then to change the race completely with just one person.
Yeah.
And people ask me, is it worth it? Well, maybe we get your opponent out and you don't have to spend $1 million or spend the rest of your life on call time. Yeah, probably worth it.
Yeah.
And those are all real situations where we've gotten somebody out of the race and that's it. We kick our feet up and no more call time, no more this, coast in and start governing.
I want to do a little follow-up with those answers, if you don't mind. So the
Sure.
The first one is, one of the things that we're experiencing as political consultants and political professionals is this authenticity factor. I mean, it's always been prevalent, I think, on a certain level, the candidate that you want to go get a beer with feeling. But the millennials in particular are very reactive. Millennial voters are very reactive to any perception of inauthenticity. And I think there's a push for candidates to be more forthright and honest about transgressions and things. Like, I'm not talking about domestic violence or any serious major felony crimes. I'm talking about, low-level drug use in college, sex lives. I'm thinking about that candidate that was running for governor of Arizona that literally put his entire sex life on his website. And that was a big,
yes.
kerfuffle during that time. And there's this push, I think, to one, stave off the work that you're doing, right? The skullduggery, the digging around in dumpsters and trying to find information on people by being forthright about some of that stuff. But I also think there's a change in the electorate and that things like bankruptcies maybe don't have the potency that they did anymore because of the crash in 2000.
Recession.
Yeah, the recession. The financial struggles that people have, and medical bankruptcies in particular are a special category to deal with. So I guess my pushback, my very long-winded soliloquy here in getting to the question is, do you think the things that used to be potent are not as potent anymore? And also, why shouldn't candidates who are listening to this say, forget this. This is not what I want to put my spouse through. That's not what I want to put myself through. You're going to pull up a police arrest that I had when I was 17 years old, and that's insane. I don't want to do this. So what do you want to say to those folks in particular?
Well, I think that there are some things that are more forgivable than others. I've had a number of candidates with bankruptcies, and I think that people are more forgivable for those, especially because a lot of folks who are running now maybe had a whole different life 10 years ago when the market crashed and the bubble burst, the housing bubble burst, and they can even use that in their narrative to say, hey, I know what it's like. I had to declare bankruptcy because we were underwater on our mortgage, so I get it. Candidates would like to think that those things don't matter. Okay, that what's the difference if I was arrested for I was at Mardi Gras and I urinated in a park and I got a citation. Okay, well, there are no candidates who are completely self-funded and do everything by themselves. So you're bringing on campaign workers, other consultants, donors, to say nothing of the volunteers and the party apparatus. You owe it to them to say, hey, I'm taking this seriously. We know what our liabilities are, and we put them out there. It's an issue of trust. Because if you don't find that information out and it comes out, then you look like you tried to hoodwink people. And maybe you get away with that with the volunteers or the staff or the consultants, but not everybody. You're not going to get away with that with everybody. I mean, maybe some supporters will forgive you, but the party won't, and the donors won't. And by the way, having one of those people like that in a race, that's one thing. Having two of them, no. Which is to say that you may feel that way, but guess what? Your opponent is not going to. And when people are on the fence about research, I always say, listen, it's better to know about it and not do anything than not have the information and not be able in a position to do it. There's other factors. There are some places where if you miss a tax payment, or you owe tax payments at the time of filing, then you're ineligible for the ballot. So imagine if you owed a $10 fee on your personal property tax. Filing comes, somebody goes down to City Hall and finds it and says, sorry, you're disqualified. You would have given somebody like me $1,200 to do a due diligence check. I would have found that, 12 minutes.
Right.
So is that worth it? Is that worth it to save the whole campaign? Yeah, I tend to think so. it has a greater value than the amount of money you pay. At the risk of being tossed out of the Researchers Guild, listen, a lot of consultants will work with you on price because I guess there's a point where it's just not worth it to do it, especially if you're very busy this cycle. But people want to work with candidates.
Mm-hmm.
So if they come in at 5,000 and your line is 4,000, people will be able to work something out. Campaigns generate equity. The more campaigns you can say you work with, the more people you meet. It's good. It's good. In fact, the only jobs that I usually turn down are for A, ethical reasons. I've already aligned with somebody who's also running the race, or B, sometimes you get a feeling that somebody's really not going to pay. They're just not set up to be like in a serious situation.
Right.
Now my senses of, I say, no. I know what real campaigns look like, and this is it. But other than that, I usually don't say that.
So you've talked a lot about some of the things that you find on people, like speeding tickets and other arrest records, other things like that. I'm curious, what is the most explosive piece of information that you have found? Do you have a favorite research project that you did? And did you think, was there any situation where you were sure, this was going to change the race, this was going to be the thing that flips it, but it didn't, or vice versa?
Unfortunately, a lot of the time, the most intriguing, for lack of a better word, stuff we find is in our self-research. And doing that, it's sort of, it's a strange phenomena because you're sort of happy as a researcher whenever you find something, and then you're like, oh, wait, this is on our client.
Whoops.
Right. But at least you're showing somebody that you're doing it. And I'm trying to think how much I could say without identifying it. But I have found, I haven't found yet, so-and-so hit their spouse, in a fight or at their house. I thought I would. I have found weird sexual stuff, and it's just I don't even like passing it around. I'll tell my colleagues, and I can't even say it. There's just people get in situations where we're talking now about Me Too and this movement. Well, there's police reports years ago, and they don't go away. The tax liens are amazing. I mean, people don't pay. When you see somebody, when you get a lot of IRS liens, things like that. The thing about those is they're so easy to find, and they're so black and white as far as you didn't pay your taxes. Let's see. The DUIs, I found a bunch of those. The detail they go into in police reports is just, it's astounding, because you have to. It's not a minor offense, and so you get a list of all the medications you take. Think about how much people will be comfortable saying. To say nothing of the fact that you got to put your height and your weight and all these things. The DUIs are pretty bad. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, is there no HIPAA? Is there no HIPAA overlay with that kind of stuff?
No.
That's crazy.
Yeah, why do you get to have access to this? There's just some scary information. If there's sexual stuff in people's relationships that you don't even want to name or say out loud to other people, that, it freaks me out on what could be found out about me or anyone I know.
The answer is everything. And here's the deal, is that when I was a reporter and I'd make a request for information, a million flags would go up, right? Because, Jake Wagman proposed his fat. She wants to know, you can't okay. So I would send an email to low-level, mid-level information officer, and they get a call back from the executive director, or the president, or the chairman, or whatever. Now, I'm going to exercise my ability to curse in the podcast. No one gives a shit. No, I don't mean anybody. People see Jake Wagman of Shield Research, they think I'm a title agent. Okay? They just run it through. I'm one of a dozen requests that every town police department gets, okay? And we'd love to think that everybody redacts the things they're supposed to. I've gotten situations, and I triangulate, okay? So here's how it works. I have LexisNexis Public Records Service, which gives me the last 6 numbers of your Social Security number, okay?
Whoa. And
then if I find a bankruptcy, guess what I have? I get the first 4 because Nexus X's out the second part, and the federal government and the district court X's out the second part. So I put this together, and now I have your Social Security number.
Oh, okay? My God.
And then whenever you get what I'll do a lot of times is this. Even if I see somebody got a speeding ticket's nothing. It doesn't matter. I request the ticket because a lot of times the ticket will have the driver's license number on it. And then with the driver's license number, I can request your entire driver's abstract. So getting a speeding ticket, the copy of it, which is a mundane public record, it takes 2 seconds to give somebody, gives me entree into these other issues. And so I can find out if somebody had their license suspended 10 years ago in the case that they thought was shut. And this should give you an idea that this is not easy to do at home. You can't. I mean, I don't have any special access. I'm a civilian, but I know where to go. This is not something you could just sort of pick up. This is not Googling somebody and going to like the fifth, result and seeing what it is.
Just like following leads.
Yeah. I could find out all sorts of things on somebody. For instance, the city of Chicago has a great public records policy. In Illinois, they have to give you records within 5 days. So I had a project on a Monday, boom, I'm sending out to police departments, I'm sending out here. Anytime this person's name is mentioned in a report, on Friday afternoon, I'm kicking back and I'm seeing what came back. And they don't care. The police departments, they don't know. It's public record. It doesn't matter to them. I'm not a reporter, so I don't raise that flag. So people are usually pretty cooperative.
Ugh.
I need to recover a little bit.
Have I ruined your faith in humanity? It's funny because
you did not ruin it. It has already been ruined, but it's not restoring it. Right. It's definitely not in a restoration mode right now. So I think we don't want to put people in a catatonic state here, but I do think it's important for candidates who are running right now and listening to this podcast or who are thinking about running to know honestly what they're putting themselves through, right? And I also think at the same time, it is incumbent on us as political professionals to be very honest and forthright about what we do to win our races. And I think some of the stuff that you're talking about, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, is very low level stuff, right? The bankruptcy, the speeding tickets. I want to really underline what you said about the trust. It's not the crime, it's the cover up typically that gets people into trouble. And I think if you're running as a candidate, who's maybe like a moral majority family values leader, and then you turn around and oops, you've asked your mistress to have an abortion, or you are having same-sex relationships with, young men, and you're running around being,
homophobic.
Right. Not to put too fine a point on it. Yes, exactly. Those are the kinds of things that I think opposition research can help uncover. And you certainly want to know that about yourself, and you certainly want to know that about your opposition. But I want to ask you, Jake, what's available out there? I mean, obviously, you just put together a very stark picture about Social Security numbers and medical history that can be found on DWIs. What else can people find about me, Jason Bennett, if I decide that I'm going to run for office someday?
Well, you're right that a lot of these things that scare these folks that we're talking about, they're the easy. They're based. This is not digging in people's trash. This is just going to the courthouse and finding the most mundane of records. A lot of it is you let the research dictate where you go, and the truth, especially now we're in a generation of candidates, a lot of the folks that I'm working for are between 29 and 39, which is to say that virtually their whole lives are online, okay? And I tell my kids, I'm going to tell my kids when don't ever do Facebook. Like, don't ever do it. Don't. And if you're posting things like, hey, go baseball team, Happy New Year. Like, that's it. Because especially if there's younger people thinking about getting into office, I find people who are running for office pictures of college when they're drinking with alcohol, and yes, there's nothing wrong with having a beer or wine or what have you, but it's not good. It's not helpful. It's not contributing to anything. So a lot of folks' social media is online. A lot of people who are running now have had their whole lives on social media, and it never occurred to them to make it private. Also, what I do is, so maybe your Facebook account is private, but your college roommate, your best friend, your cousin, your brother, your spouse, theirs is not. And a lot of times you'll maybe make a comment on theirs, or they'll post a shared picture. So you got to be very careful. And through all of that, we have an ability to find where the pressure points are. It's a combination. So if I know that you went to school where I did at the University of Missouri, I'm going to go and ask the campus police if they ever an interaction with you, and then I'm going to find out you had a minor in possession. Okay, and again, our president is doing a million times worse than this, but so and so running for city council is not Donald Trump, and he's not going to get the level of forgiveness that some voters have given to him. And so we put these things, it's like a puzzle. We put it all together. Basically anything that's been written down, especially if you're coming from if you're running, if you were a city official or you were an incumbent, anything that's been written down, there's a chance we can find it.
Okay, so let me ask you, I'm just going to rapid fire you some questions, and you can tell me if you can find this through your searches. Can you find out my medical history if I'm not arrested for a DUI?
No, but if you got injured and there was a lawsuit as a result of it, yes, I can.
Okay.
Or if you didn't pay your bills, because then what they'll do is when they sue you for your unpaid bill, they'll staple a copy of all the procedures they did to the lawsuit.
Okay. How I did in college, my scholastic, what do they?
Like grades?
Yeah, my grades, but what do they call it when you ask?
Your transcript?
Transcript. Can you get my transcript?
I could find out, you'd be amazed about how many people lie about graduating college. I can confirm whether or not you graduated from where you say we subscribe to a degree verification service. And if you are working in certain states like Florida with great public record laws, when I ask for a copy of your personnel file, your transcript is going to be there lots of times.
Okay.
So we've gotten transcripts before.
Non-moving traffic violations like parking tickets, obstruction, whatever. You can get access to those?
Easy. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Pornography. My porn searches.
The way we can get that, if you had a lack of wisdom enough to do it at a government computer, I could do a FOIA or public records request for your browser history.
Okay. How often does that happen?
It doesn't, because it's not worth. It's not really worth the time.
Yeah.
Because the government could in turn charge you for the amount of time it takes. But for instance, if we had a hint that somebody was doing that on a government computer, that we can do. We could ask for their browser.
Right.
Or, sometimes you just, if you're in a situation where someone's pushing on you and you want to hit back. I mean, how'd you like to be at your work at City Hall and say, by the way, someone wants to see every internet site you visited since you got here?
Right. Yeah. So if you worked at a public institution, yes, but I couldn't go to Cambridge Analytica, for example, and buy my Facebook history. Nobody could go do that.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. And then I guess that also begs the question, since, Cambridge Analytica is in the news right now and dominating it, can people buy those kinds of data profiles on their opposition? Can they go to data mining companies, big data companies, and buy consumer data on people?
I don't think so, because it's early to tell. I mean, because this is developing. I don't think so, because I think a lot of that is close to metadata. I mean, they're made 50 million names. They're not interested in what Joe from Seattle, what he liked. They're interested in sort of big data type pictures and targeting. They're not interested in a particular person. And plus, they may have gotten that through malicious means. And as a researcher, I say all this stuff, but I never do anything unethical, or I don't come to the line with the law. Like, I am a law-abiding citizen. It's not worth anything to bend the law or anything. Everything I do is, I have no problem, going home and telling my wife about it. And so you don't want to purchase fruit from a rotten tree. You don't want to be in a situation where you're buying information that may have been obtained criminally or unlawfully, because then you're a culpable. So I never do that. And the question everybody asks is, do I go through trash? I haven't, but I would, because it is legal. Once somebody puts their trash out, most of the time it becomes public property. So I've never gone through anybody's trash, but I would if I had to.
True confessions, I have. True confessions, I have.
What'd you find?
Oh, you have? Oh, good.
Well, not necessarily for opposition research. You have to do dumpster diving if your mail pieces don't hit on time. You have to go to apartment complexes and dig through the trash to see if someone's tossed it, or recycling. You have to do that. In Washington, it's mostly recycling. But yeah, so I've had to. It's not glamorous, I can tell you that. It's not something I brag about on every episode of this podcast.
It was glamorous.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound glamorous.
I'm trying to envision it. Like Jason crawling into a giant recycling dumpster.
It's not a hot look. I didn't ask for photos.
I have a buddy who's an attorney. He tells me, he says, don't do two things wrong at once. Which is to say, if you're going to look at bad things on your computer, do it at home. If you're going to, that's when you get caught. If you're going to do something wrong, don't do it in a way that either the police are going to write it down, or your supervisor at your government job is going to write it down.
Yeah.
If you have sensitive medical information, pay your bill so it doesn't become a lawsuit. So, don't, I mean, that, people get in trouble is where they do the wrong thing and then they do the wrong thing again. And if you're late on your taxes, I don't know if you're late in your taxes. It only becomes public record when you don't pay them at all.
Right.
And you get a lien. Do a small wrong thing. Don't do two wrong things at once.
Yeah. Jake, this is the problem. I do a lot of trainings with candidates. They hate the negative campaigning, right? The opposition research stuff that fuels the negative campaigning just totally turns them off and deters candidates from wanting to run for office. And I think there probably needs to be a line drawn, and I'm hearing you say it. There's the illegal stuff, which should give pause, I think, to any candidate running for office. It doesn't mean that people don't believe in rehabilitation or anything like that, but I think the stuff that freaks people out the most is dragging their partner, their spouse, their kids, themselves through something where this puritanical view that we have of candidates, that they should be blemish free, that they can't live up to that standard, and they don't want to drag their spouses or candidates through a bunch of muck to get to elected office, right? And you're making a distinction there. I totally get it. You're really focusing on illegal activity, stuff where you've broken the law or haven't paid a bill or done something, wrong that's very clear. It's this other stuff that I think, does kind of freak people out. Like if someone is recovering from breast cancer and someone's going to make an issue of, the candidate might not live to see the rest of their term, right? I mean, you hear that a lot when people use medical history against them. It's about being, not well to public serve. Am I on the right track with that?
Maybe some of this is it's almost a natural selection, or maybe it's good preparation for running for office. You have to develop a thick skin. Maybe I am just a soulless dementor, but when somebody says, "Well, don't you feel bad?" I'm like, "No, I don't feel bad. Nobody asked this person to run for office. Don't you feel bad digging this stuff up?" I'm like, "No, I don't feel bad." First of all, A, they don't have to run for office, and B, I'd much rather prevent somebody from winning who was bad than just sit aside and do nothing. So, but part of this, I think, is that listen, if negative campaigning didn't work, people wouldn't do it. They don't do it because they get a type of thrill out of it. They do it because it works.
Right.
And if it didn't work, then we wouldn't do it. And the risk of sounding a little Pollyannish, it's also a good reason to live a good life. Part of the benefits of just being a nice, honest person, as silly as this sounds, is that you don't ever have to worry about what folks find out about you. And I say this more to maybe the folks in college and things like that are the young Democrats and thinking about running. Think about that. It's a lot easier to defend yourself when you don't have anything to defend. But getting back to your question, you have to develop a thick skin if you want to do this. And that is part of the process.
Right.
It's not going away. And that's why you have people who are messaging consultants who could say to you, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We had a bankruptcy. We're going to make it part of our narrative. We're going to jiu-jitsu them. That happens a lot with negative campaigning backfires. And somebody says, well, so-and-so didn't pay the bills. And they said, well, of course. That just shows you because they're all medical bills, and that's what's wrong with healthcare in America, and that's why I'm running. So sometimes, and if you have people who are good at that, then you could turn those negatives into positives. But if you're scared about what people are going to say about you, then maybe it's not right for you, because they are going to say those things, because you have to be. That's part of democracy.
Yeah.
Not to sound too sappy, and maybe this sort of these millennial campaigns. Maybe folks, maybe they're not as forthcoming as the guy who put all his people he'd been in relationships with on a website. I don't know if he had their permission to do that or not. But maybe you are more forthcoming, and you neutralize some of those liabilities. Hey, yeah, when I was in college, man, I got busted for a joint, and there was a tough time in my life, and I got a DWI, and it just makes me realize how important it is to be held accountable and things like that. But by the way, everything I'm saying is an argument for self-research. You can't sit down with a consultant and plan a way to make this work for you if you don't know about it.
Right.
And nobody wants to be surprised.
Well, so what about research on staff? Like if you're a campaign and you're hiring staff, but you can't afford to hire a research firm, do you have advice on what candidates should know about their staff and how to contain information?
They should say, friend me on Facebook, and I want to look at your Facebook. And they should just do some low-level stuff. Look at their social media. Spend an hour and go through their social media. And even say to I just want to go through your social media. Friend me. When I friend you, accept it. Because that's where a lot of the problems are. You hire 23-year-old campaign manager or deputy field or whatever, and then it turns out that they said retweeted some ridiculous meme about something offensive, and at the time they were just a citizen. Too bad. You are running for office, and you cannot have distractions.
Right.
Got to look at their social media, because that's where they get in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is Facebook's been around, open to the public since 2007?
Yeah.
So, Jake, we're running way over time, and I know you have to get ready for Seder tonight, so I'm sorry.
That's right.
For running over. Thank you for giving us the time. Let's talk a little brass tacks here. what does it cost to hire a firm like yours, generally speaking, and for like a down ballot race?
When you say down ballot, do you mean like city council or do you mean like state treasurer?
I'd say like state legislature and below. Anything non-congressional, non-statewide.
Let's say state rep 2,500. Okay, making sure that like as long as it depends who the opponent is, but if it's somebody who hasn't been in office before, okay, I could do it for 2,500. I do it for everything is different, but I've done it for usually it'll be between 2,500 and 4,500 for like a state rep race. Okay, a lot of times 3,500, a lot of times 4,500, and it goes up depending on usually the size of the race.
Okay, good. And then where can folks find out more about you and the work that you do, or if they want to contact you and hire you on, where can folks reach you?
Oh, great. Yeah, shieldresearch.com, spelled like it sounds, Shield Research, Shield, like the
Captain
Marvel
America Shield. Yeah.
Intelligence Agency, Captain America. Yes, exactly. And I named it Shield because a shield is both, you could use it for defense and offense.
Right. Like it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll include those in the show notes. This was very informative, slightly scary, slightly mortifying, but very, very informative.
Oh, no.
Thank you so much for your time, Jake. We really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Oxymeos to everybody, and thank you very much. I enjoyed talking about it.
All right, have a good one.
Thanks, Jake.
Another big thank you to Jake Wagman of Shield Research.
How you feeling?
I mean, I knew some of this stuff already. I think I never really could have dug into how far the tentacles could reach on the research. So that was, some cold water.
Social security number thing of like, I know where to find the place that shows me your last 6 digits and then the other place that shows me the first 4 digits.
Right.
And then I just know all of your stuff.
Well, that's unique to bankruptcies, so let's not freak everyone out that their social security numbers are
maybe I missed that.
Freely available out there. No, he was taking 2 legal documents and merging them together, essentially, but you have to have been in legal...
Still, that's...
in suit,
that's
I guess.
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a little disconcerting because that's the one we talked about. Are there other ways that people can get social security numbers?
Right.
Maybe more easily on the dark net or something. We didn't even get into the dark net.
Oh, my God.
So, listeners, what did you think? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Are you panicking right now, too?
Yeah, exactly. We'd love to hear from you. Our email is always available. We've gotten some great feedback and some suggestions at podcast@electionu.com. And while you're at it, we'd love it if you went over to iTunes and subscribed. We love the ratings. We love the reviews. We try to interface with folks as much as we possibly can who want to make this a better podcast.
Yeah. I talked to somebody the other day who was super excited that we were available on Spotify. So that's my plug for Spotify. You can find the podcast on any of the podcasty
apps and stuff.
Outlets and apps and...
One other little fun tidbit, we're on iHeartRadio as well, and the downloads there or the listens have been going through the roof, but they declared bankruptcy, so I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, no.
I know. I don't know what's going to happen if they're going to be purchased by somebody else or something. So for our iHeartRadio listeners out there, we'll see what we can do about finding out some more information about you. Yeah, we'll figure out what we can do. Maybe you need to move over to Spotify in the short term. Anyway. That's it for this week. I'm your co-host, Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.